Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Back to Suicide. This is one of your hosts, Dr. Diane Kaufman. I like to be called Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, Humanism Medicine awardee, an internationally award winning lyricist, and a retired child psychiatrist. I'm the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And I'm delighted to be with co host Kino Isaac, coming to us from South Africa. Kino is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and most importantly, a mental health advocate for independent artists. And we're so happy that our special guest today is Ashley Taylor. Welcome, Ashley. Ashley is the Community Engagement and Partnerships Coordinator on the suicide prevention team for the VA in the United States here in Oregon. She has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Maryland Global Campus and a Master of Science degree from Capella University, where she studied human behavior. With combat deployments in 2000 and 2008, Ashley is a post 9/11 Army veteran from Columbia County, Oregon, currently working, as I said, on the suicide prevention team at the Department of Veteran Affairs. She's also a veteran spouse and advocate of veterans' behavioral health. She served as the Texas Regional Director and then Chief Grants Officer and Veteran Advocacy at the Operation Red Wings Foundation that provides relief, direction, and hope to military families with tools that provide relief from the invisible wounds of PTSD, mild TBI, traumatic brain injury, and chronic pain. Since December 2023, Ashley is an Oregon coordinator with the Veteran Affairs Community Engagement and Partnerships Coordinators that collaborates at the community, regional, and state levels to support community coalition building for evidence-based informed suicide prevention interventions specific to the local veteran population. And Ashley and I met as panelists at the Just Create Community Suicide Prevention event held in Hillsboro, Oregon, which was quite wonderful. That was back in September 2025. And so, very warm welcome to you, Ashley. Yeah, we're so happy you're here. And we were, as before the podcast began, we were talking just a little about so much more needs to be done. And I think a large part of that, so much more, is gatherings like this, right? True collaboration, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So please, Ashley, jump in wherever you'd like to jump in. Maybe start off with what has informed your interest in suicide prevention?
Ooh, I love that question. So it's personal to me. I think that's where what jumps out to me in answering that. It's personal to me. As you mentioned, and it's always interesting hearing your bio. As a veteran, I'm at risk of suicide. Veterans are dying at the highest rate of suicide, unfortunately. And I am a dual veteran household. And so I like to say 50% of my work is to serve my veteran, brothers and sisters, but also 50% is to serve myself and to make sure I know how to be safe in a home with firearms. I am a firearm owning household. And so that increases my risk. And so kind of knowing that, so that's what I would say piqued my interest for this was it's personal to me, and seeing so many of my brothers and sisters lose their lives, struggle with their risk factors. And then also, the thing I love most about my role is helping people find their protective factors, helping people find what makes them happy, what makes them feel fulfilled, what helps them connect with other people. And so that's what because we'll always be at risk. That's, everyone will always be at risk. We'll always have risk factors, but I really want to capitalize on how we can protect ourselves and trying to make that simple because it's so complex, as everything we were talking about and collaboration, but really there are a lot of protective factors, and especially for veterans.
You know that, I guess, neurological thing called like mirror neurons, right? And also just the fact that we all need to be mirrored, right? That attachment is related to being mirrored by someone, right? Starting with what? Infancy, as soon as we're born, right? And who knows, maybe there's an internal mirror, right, when we're fetuses within our mother, right, being attuned to the growing baby. But I was thinking that the mirror, if you look at it not only as a metaphor, but looking at the mirror, that in some sense it's potentially distorted per se, but it's mirroring back the fullness of you, right? So I'm thinking how when we're in distress, we need that mirror, the mirror that of a person who's what compassionately empathizing with the pain, but is also mirroring back the possibilities and the realities of strength and hope, right? And without that mirror, and maybe that mirror can be a spiritual mirror too, right? But without that other, that caring other, a person can really disappear into the void. And we don't want that to happen.
No. And that, I see a lot in the veteran space. Military service is so unique in itself. Every person who serves has their own individual experience. And when you serve, you're serving with a whole, a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a surrounding of people that's kind of all doing the same thing and you're in it together. But then when you get out, it can be a struggle to find those who get you. And so I find that it's hard, I think, to find that mirror sometimes until you find it. And so like about the protective factors, because I think a lot of veterans, what I've learned over the past 15 years in working in this space, taking my own veteran hat off, but just learning about different veterans and their experiences and all of their unique, transition stories and their experiences while in the military. And sometimes when they get out, I have found that people feel alone and they think that no one understands them. And when I can connect them, one of the national strategies for preventing veteran suicide that the VA has, one of our key priority areas is building connection. And there are, thankfully a lot of resources for helping to build that connection. And I find that to be so positive with helping people find that peer support, that you're not alone out on an island, that yes, your experiences are just yours, but there are other people that are compassionate and willing to listen and willing to support you and, share, how can we make sure you'll be here tomorrow? That today is not the day where we want to have someone lose their life. We want people to feel connected and hear from other people that are potentially struggling too.
I think it might be a real balance in the idea of the uniqueness of the person. So we're not invalidating their uniqueness, right? Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, you're not alone, and yet you are unique, right?
Yes.
Because you could potentially minimize, no one wants to do this, but a person might feel diminished somehow, like you're not alone. It's like, oh, maybe I don't care about those other people who are having problems at this moment. I care about myself, right? So you're not alone and you're unique. And other people have gone through difficult things too, and they've survived it. That's the key part too, I think, that there's hope, right?
Yes.
So you're not alone in your misery and wanting to be dead. Yes, that's part of the story, right? But,
yes.
But even more importantly is people have survived this, and you can too.
Yes. And something that I love too are the conversations that I'm so fortunate in my role that like yes, it's personal to me, but it's also professional, so it kind of overlaps a lot in my professional life and my personal life. But I do love building these communities of support. I mean, how awesome was that Just Create community event? And I love seeing that in my professional role. I'm able to see that there are conversations happening, just like with this podcast today. And I just want to see more and more of them, because I do think that that's such an important part of creating all this, these avenues of support and awareness, is talking about it and having these conversations that this is a reality that people are facing, and the ebbs and flows in life, and risk factors feel increased right now in our time of life, in our time of the world right now, and people need help. And I love having these conversations so that people know where to turn to. Like during that podcast, or not the podcast, the panel, I mean, there were so many seeds that were planted in those conversations, and the conversations that happened after that were so powerful and important to the people that attended. It was magical.
Could you share a bit, Ashley, about your own experience within the military?
Yes, sure. So I joined the military in 2003. I had graduated high school in 2001, and I tried, the community college thing. I was really lacking motivation. I was involved in some really serious risk factors, if you will, and I needed a change. And the military was that change for me. There was a big ad campaign to be the army of one and travel the world. And so I was like, "Ooh, I need to do that. I needed to change my people's, places, and things in my life." And so I did that. And I've joined March 2003, which was the start of the Iraq War. The day I left for basic training was March 18th, and we bombed Iraq a day or two later. And so I kind of didn't know what I was getting myself into. I was almost regretting it, but I was like, I'm just gonna go for it and see, because we thought that the war would be over and done with. But then I found myself in Iraq 9 months after joining, as one of the lowest ranking people. And I always accredit my resiliency to, I was in an amazing unit. We had amazing leadership that, since the war was first starting, kind of, we were all in it together, and a bunch of people in my unit had not deployed previously. So we were all fighting these battles together. And I think that played a huge role, because it was a really heavy part of the war. There was a lot of action going on, but I felt this sense of a safety net. I felt really trained and ready to encounter anything I needed to encounter. So I kind of just didn't know how to be scared or what to be scared of, because it was 9 months after joining the military and it was a brand new war. So that was an interesting experience. I did, as a female, I was a diesel mechanic, but during that early time of the war, we went out of the wire and went out on a lot of support convoys. So I did, even though I wasn't in a combat role, because combat roles didn't officially open for women until 2013, but there wasn't any front lines in the Iraq war. So I did experience some combat action, which was, I look back at it now and it definitely was scary, but I'm honored to have experienced those experiences. I'm honored to have survived them. And I have even more of a level of respect, because I was there for those who lost their lives, the sacrifices that were made for people, their families that experienced that loss, and just experiencing what it's like to live firsthand in serving in the military in a war was very eye-opening for my whole journey. But yeah, so deployed one time, and then after that deployment, I got stationed in California and deployed again. That deployment in 2008 was much easier than the first one. The hardest part was being away from my family. And I didn't leave the base that time, and the base I had 2 swimming pools. I almost felt like it was like a reward. You had such a first hard deployment, and now the second one will be easier on you. And so that was really neat to kind of see the difference in kind of wartime. And then after that, I had my initial everyone's contract is you have to serve for at least 8 years in the inactive ready reserve. And so I was at 7 years, and I knew I wanted to wrap it up. I kind of wanted to get my life started. For some people, definitely for me, I felt like my life was on pause while I was serving in the military, especially, going away on deployments. And so I was ready to get my life started. I had started attending school while in service. The military pays for 100% of your tuition while you're active duty. So I was actually taking classes during my second deployment, like having proctored exams, and there was a computer lab on my base in Iraq. So that was a pretty cool experience. So once I made the decision to get out, I wanted to finish my degrees, and that's all part of my resiliency too, that I'm thankful for the resources and benefits that I have from serving. I didn't go into it knowing that I would have all these benefits after service. I went into the military thinking I needed to change my life, and it did that, and then some. It gave me such powerful experiences, but then it also paid for my school. It paid for, because I finished half of my bachelor's degree while I was active duty. So when I got out, the 3 years of my GI Bill, I had enough to finish my bachelor's and go all the way to my master's. So with no student debt. And then that led me into this world of, I fell into a position. I knew I wanted to help people find their own resiliency, find their own happiness. And so there was a job connecting military families to resources. And I was like, what is that? And I was like, well, I'm a veteran. I guess I can do this. And that's what opened the door to me for realizing there's a world of connecting veterans to services that are out there. And yeah, that's my journey.
Did it surprise you, the risk of suicide?
Yes, it did. It surprised me that there was even a world of veterans who didn't know about resources. When I got out of the military, I was one of those veterans that didn't know about resources. I knew about the VA for healthcare because, I was a student with no job, so I needed health insurance. So I signed up for the VA for healthcare right away. But when I applied for this job connecting veterans to services, I was like, what is that? What is this world of veteran services, of community nonprofits, of veterans needing resources? I didn't know that. And it did surprise me that so many veterans don't know about these services, just like me. And so it's very, I attribute it to now, after learning it, after getting out in 2010 and being in this professional space, I attribute it to when we're in the military, you're taught everything you need to know. You're taught when to do it, how to do it, who to do it with, and what to wear while you're doing it, whatever that job is. And so when you get out, you are given some training, and that training is different for everyone. How much you pay attention, how much you know what you want to do, how much other risk factors are in your life with what traumas you experienced, and what your level of working on yourself is. And so it's a different transition piece for everyone to learn about what is available to them. And I think that's a big contributing factor to our risks, is not knowing the resources that exist, not seeking them out. Because, again, if we need to know something, we're going to be taught it. And so you're not continuously taught it until you seek it. And then also we're taught to just continue the mission no matter what and drive on. So maybe, if people feel like they can't continue their mission, that just increases that risk. And then what I've learned, looking back and for the past 15 years, how comfortable veterans are with firearms. And that has really opened my eyes to the increased level of risk too. How comfortable veterans are with firearms, how many veterans have firearms. But in the level of surprise, I am gratefully surprised how many veterans, once we talk about firearm safety in the terms of just being safe with your firearm as a safe firearm handler, that conversation really opens the doors to really decrease those firearm risk factors. Once that we open the eyes of people to say, look, you can have a firearm, but you need to be safe with it because it is a huge risk factor.
Ashley, if you could you give some statistics around suicide in the veteran active and post-active direct service in that population? What are the statistics?
Yes. So I'm not an expert on statistics for people serving in the military, but for the veteran population, unfortunately, it is increasingly high. And for Oregon, well, for the national rate of suicides for all age groups, it's about 18.4. I could be wrong on that point, but it sits at 18. And for the state of Oregon, for all age groups, the rate per 100,000 is 54. So that dramatic increase. And Oregon is one of the highest states, unfortunately, for veterans and suicide, as far as that rate goes. And then when we think of the method, and this is why we have that conversation about firearms, nationally, people tend to use a firearm 55% of the time. In Oregon, for veterans, veterans use a firearm 75% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that really opens my eyes to the problem, right? And like knowing the problem is half the battle. A lot of people, when we give presentations in the community, don't realize that how staggering that those statistics are. And it's heartbreaking, but something I always emphasize to people is knowing the problem is half the battle. We need to know the problem so that we know what we need to fix. And knowing that it exists, knowing that we're at risk, but then also knowing how we can fix it, how we can all play a role in knowing that it's an issue, knowing that firearms increase our risk factor, but knowing how to be safe with firearms, knowing how to have that conversation in a way that's respectful to firearm owners, understanding how some veterans have special relationships with firearms. You know, firearms are important to a lot of people. And Oregon is a high firearm owning state in and of itself, along with veterans, are a high firearm owning population. So kind of having those conversations respectfully, and empowering veterans to make safe decisions with things like having a safety plan, knowing what to do when if you find ourselves in crisis having thoughts of suicide, or if we encounter someone, these, I say simple, but they're so complex. But my goal is really to make the conversation simple of how do you identify when someone's in crisis, and then how do you talk them through how to encourage them to get help, and really making that conversation tangible. So we talk about this a lot. Some colleagues of mine and I, like, we compare it to the seatbelt issue. Back in the day when we transitioned from not wearing seatbelts to wearing seatbelts, and we learned if you wear a seatbelt, it saves your life. And there was a lot of, I'm not wearing the seatbelt and all this. But then as people started wearing seatbelts more, and as cars, put that really annoying dinging when you don't have your seatbelt on, people are surviving. And so, or just like breast cancer screening, breast cancer used to be a really high rate of dying. And now, because of screenings and prevention work, the rate of death from breast cancer has gone down. And that's our goal for suicide. If we can have these conversations and implement evidence-based prevention strategies, like talking about it, building connection, talking about safe storage of firearms, talking about safety plans, and having a plan when we are in crisis, then we can save lives. And we've seen it when these are implemented.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm wondering, could you speak about what would hold a person back as a veteran, right, or active duty, in saying I'm in emotional distress? So why, and there are obvious risks per se of the
Mhm.
sharing, but we want those risks to either be eliminated or to be overpowered by the benefit of sharing. But why would a person not tell someone? On some level, there could be the shame factor, put that in quotation marks. So potentially shame, but I think there are other factors involved why a person may want that to be hidden and not let other people know.
Yes, and I think my answer to this, I think, is two parts. One is, I think I'll go with the more professional answer here, where people tend to think uh, it's going to affect a background check, it's going to affect a security clearance, it's going to affect my rights to own a firearm. And so we professionally, we have a lot of myth busting surrounding that. We hand out this really cool handout that talks about myths for the VA confiscating firearms, and the VA doesn't do that. It has nothing to do with confiscating firearms. There are very extreme reasons why a person's firearm has to be taken away, and thoughts of suicide is not one of those. And so kind of myth busting the fears of what's going to happen to me if I say I'm suicidal. Am I going to be locked up? Is someone going to come and take all my guns away? Am I going to be shamed? Am I going to be able to, find a job if I am in law enforcement? All these things that kind of lead to that level. And we have a bunch of myth busting towards that, because none of that is a reality. We don't see that. We just want people to get help. But then on the other side, from the personal standpoint, I have those fears too. I not only work at the VA, I utilize the VA for my healthcare, and I utilize the VA that I work at. And so sometimes it can be, and as a person who has my own mental health issues, who uses the mental health care at VA, so sometimes I have to check myself of how I have to have faith in the services that exist, that privacy laws exist in the medical field, especially, so that we can feel comfortable seeking the care we need. And that's the bottom line. But I will say, thinking back over the years, even while I was in the service, there's a lot of stigma with admitting that something's going on. And a lot of it has to do with just simply everyone knowing about your business. Thankfully, as a professional VA employee who uses VA services, and there's all those privacy laws that exist. But while you're in the military, if something's going on, typically a lot of your peers know, where's this person? Are they in the doctors? And so there can be some hesitance to seek care. And I'll give you an example. When we were coming back from a deployment, my first deployment, there was this thing done called a post-deployment health assessment, where you're asked a series of questions, kind of getting a baseline of how you're doing. Are you having nightmares? Are you having thoughts of suicide? And at the time in 2004, this particular post-deployment health assessment was done with one clinician sitting at a table with 250 people in my company in one line. So we learned really quickly not to say yes, because you're holding up the line, right? And so that was a big issue with people not saying yeah. And it wasn't because there wasn't anything going on. It was because you didn't want to be shamed by your peers right there, and also be holding up the line. You're tired. You don't want to be standing there. So there was like a big barrier for just simply admitting that something was going on, even if you wanted to scream it from the rooftops. And I like sharing that story because my deployment in 2008, this was all a trial and error thing, right? Because the 2004 deployment was new. And so we learned, people are struggling, and we're seeing people struggling, but they're not telling us. So I saw a shift in 2008 when we had that same post-deployment health assessment. It was done when we got back from our deployment in by appointment. So it wasn't done in front of everyone. And there was an increased awareness of people who were struggling, and they weren't shamed for it. It was, we want to help you. We have identified that this is an issue. and here's some care for it. And so I did see a shift, and that was from 2004 to 2008. And I know it's improved even since then, but there's still that stigma and shame that exists from wondering, what if these changes aren't implemented? What if this doesn't happen in every unit? So I think that's what plays a role. What's going to happen when I say that I'm struggling, and is it going to affect me? And that's why I do love the crisis line, the veterans crisis line, that even for our military to use, because they can be anonymous, just simply talking to someone. So really going back to just building those protective factors and encouraging people to know about these resources, knowing about the reality of how they work, so that if there are fears of asking for help for all of these very valid reasons, we can clear those up, so that people can get the help they need without feeling these fears that are more often than not true.
I'm thinking that it would be almost anticipated that a person would be having some struggles transitioning.
You would think it's a big, I've heard the stories I could tell. My favorite thing about working in this space is hearing the different stories and experiences from veterans. And some of ones that stick out to me are, coming from, immense jobs, even if they are, jumping out of airplanes, doing, these missions that you see on TV, and being a part of even like drone operators who have to do, these things that are, fighting and killing our enemies. This is a very unique thing to the military. And then they get out, and how do you go to, Thanksgiving dinner after doing these military operations where people don't understand what you did? How the people may not even understand themselves what they did, they haven't even processed the experience that they had. So I think that definitely plays a role. Also, I have heard from people, like how I talked about how sometimes for some veterans, their life can be on pause. So then when they get out, let's say a veteran who gets out at, 26, 27, and they go back to school, and they're in school with 18, 19-year-olds. And how do you relate to that after having, this whole 7, 8 years of military experience with 18, 19-year-olds who are just starting their life? And so kind of being in these shifts of balancing these immense experiences with getting back to a mundane life, if you will.
I wanted to share with you, Ashley, that for myself, as a mental health provider for so many decades, that and my own mental health history of having attempted suicide when I was in medical school, and then later diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, hypomania and depression, that I did not share my mental health history when I was in medical school after the event. I didn't speak to anyone then. And throughout all my work years, I didn't tell anyone. And it was only when I was, I think, in my early 60s that I spoke out loud, sort of spontaneously at a suicide prevention event, and started sharing my story. And I had a fear that, one, the rules have changed, but there was a fear of, if you check off on the box for your renewal of your medical license, that you're going to lose your license.
Yes.
Right? That you're not going to be trusted anymore as a mental health provider, that there was this internal real stigma around mental health, even in the mental health community.
Right. I hear that, Diana. Like that really resonates with me because it's fearful. Like, are people going to judge me for this? If I'm supposed to be helping other people, and this perception that I can't help myself, what does that mean? That judgment. But it's like, I think it brings such powerful genuineness, though, when we can share that, hey, we're people too.
Yes.
We have issues. and we want to talk about it because it really can happen to anyone. And what better to bring that to light than to, saying it happens to me too. And also something that sticks out to me with your story is knowing that suicide is scary for people, for ourselves, and if even mental health clinicians or even MDs, like yourself, it's the suicide prevention training is very minimal, if even at all, right? And unless you're trained specifically in suicide prevention. And so it can be scary if we're not trained it, if we're not talking about the realities of it. And I feel like we've even come a long way, right? I know when I first started in the suicide prevention space, it was still very scary for even to identify when someone's just having suicidal ideations, where now we've shifted from that the whole world doesn't need to stop for suicidal ideations. We just need to address it and honor it and hold space for it and see what that person needs, right? And so I've seen like a shift in what even the evolution of how do we talk about when someone is suicidal and honoring their thoughts, but not minimizing it by just being scared and risky, right? Like, how do we proceed with this and address it in a way that's respectful to that person and not fearful?
Now, the other day I was thinking of this, and I must have been on, I don't know, either a phone call or a webinar around suicide prevention. I continually try to update myself and educate myself. But I was thinking it would be so interesting to do a survey of mental health providers. And the
Mm.
survey would be, what is the worst thing that could happen to you in your career? Would
Ooh.
it be sued for malpractice, or your patient dies by suicide?
Oh,
Okay. Or patients die by suicide. And I know for myself, it would be my patient died by suicide would be the worst thing that could happen to me in my mental health career.
oh,
But I think
wow.
that would be very interesting to know, because it also
Yes.
parallels with maybe not talking about it as much, right?
And
I'll share one other thing, that I had an adult patient of mine who had chronic pain, who was also in the healthcare field. I think she was a nurse. Back when I was living in New Jersey, she died by suicide. And then when I came to Oregon, a teenage patient of mine died by suicide. And I remember sharing this within a supportive team meeting. And I was sharing that I remember thinking, like almost each day of work, please don't someone die by suicide. That it was like a constant on my mind, like I get through another day without somebody killing themselves. And I remember sharing in this meeting that if, God forbid, another human being under my care, or you could say under my watch, died by suicide, I shared in the group, I can't be a psychiatrist anymore. I would have to stop being a psychiatrist. And I remember a coworker who was caring, and I felt she was trying to be supportive of me, but I don't think she understood the depth of the pain that I was sharing. I almost felt a bit dismissed, like, well, we need you, why would you do that, right? But the impact of suicide loss, right,
yes.
is profound. And I don't think that's talked about enough. And that suicide loss can also, if there are perhaps that and other risk factors, can increase the risk of despair and suicidal thoughts in the survivor.
Oh, wow. Diana, thank you for sharing that, because that is heartbreaking. And I would love to see that survey too, because I would hope that more people would have that level of compassion that you do. And I would hope and be hopeful to see more people would be more fearful of losing patients to suicide, because that would really highlight the level of compassion that our care providers have, that I would hope that they would have. And, and both things are valid, because I'm sure the fear of malpractice suits is scary too. But that level of compassion that you and other providers have is for the other people. And it makes me think of something that a colleague of mine always shares when encouraging people, or just getting a sense of people, when she asks, if someone was showing signs of a heart attack, would you help them? And everyone typically says yes. And it's like, okay, but if you're having a heart attack and there's no one around, are you going to help yourself? And the
Oh,
answer is yes. So it's
mhm,
like, okay, if you're willing to help other people and to help yourself, then just take out heart attack and put in suicide, and you would
mhm,
do the same. So it's
mhm.
almost like, I wonder, that provider that you talked about that was a little insensitive, maybe just didn't know the realities of suicide, right? Needed some education about it, of how preventable it can be, and bringing in that sense of compassion, that it's that, that duty to serve, and that it's a care factor, even though it's someone else taking their life. It's preventable if we can, recognize it and see that person for the whole person that they are, including their struggles. So wow, that's really powerful, Diana.
Join in. I know you've been absorbing it all.
Yeah, Ashley. Wow, your story is so special. So special. I think this is the first time. Yeah, this is the first time in my life I've actually listened to someone that's been in the war, you
Oh
know,
wow.
talk about their experience. Like, wow. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go back to when you were talking about your 50-50 split. Like 50% is taking care of other people, 50% is taking care of yourself, and you mentioned protective factors. Have you ever been in a situation, now I'm sure like using a gun is at the top of the list when it comes to dying by suicide in the field that you are in.
Yeah.
So, have you ever experienced where you've attempted to help someone, but it wasn't enough? And then you felt yourself also going off the edge and you didn't know what to do, but then you found yourself back and you found yourself grounded. Have you ever been in that situation?
You know, Unfortunately, in this space, and the statistics show it, we still lose people by suicide, right? And so I'll say that is and continues to be the hardest part of my job, to find that grounding, that what we're doing is meaningful. Because every time we hear of a suicide, part of me says, what are we doing this for? Because people are still dying. Like, all of this work that we're doing, and there's increases in suicide. We've seen the veteran data increase. It went down after 2018, and then after COVID, increased risk factors, right? So we've seen it increase, and then last year it stayed pretty level. And we're fearful that we're going to see it increase, and we should get the new data here in a couple weeks for 2023, because it's always 2 years behind. And I'll say that's what hits me the hardest. That's what always checks my own risk factors, of having faith in the work that we're doing, that it's working. That the data can be hard when we don't see decreases. However, that doesn't mean that the work, what I try to ground myself in, is that doesn't mean that the work we're doing isn't working per se. It just means that people are potentially more at risk, and they need these protective factors even more. Because when we see that over veteran suicide has been studied heavily since 2000, and so we have like a chart data that shows the ups and downs through the years, and you can see the years of increase are hard times globally. Like 2008 was a huge increase because of huge recession. 2020 was an increase because of COVID. So that's what helps me stay grounded when I feel those thoughts of loss and what are we doing, is knowing we can't stop. because more people are at risk, and we need to continue to implement these protective factors to mitigate when we are at increased risk.
And what more can like I do? I'm just an average guy out here. What can I do in my personal capacity to help?
The top two things that I always focus on are, one, recognizing the signs of suicide. So recognizing when people are feeling hopeless, are exhibiting their own personal risk factors, are talking about suicide, or talking about not wanting to live anymore. So like seeing people, right? Empathizing with people and having the conversations of suicide, calling it out, and then knowing the resources to help. So knowing, are there crisis lines in South Africa?
Yeah, yeah.
Then knowing those crisis lines. So one, recognizing; two, knowing the resources to help. The crisis lines, knowing how to be safe with firearms. It'd be interesting. I'd love to see data in South Africa if I don't know what gun laws, or if there is strong firearm owning population in South Africa, but what the suicide data is for South Africa. But those are the top two things: knowing that suicide exists and recognizing the signs of how to help ourselves and other people, and two, knowing the resources to get people the help they need.
Yeah. Well, the stats are quite high. And if I'm not mistaken, a few months ago when I checked, gun was like in the top three. So gun control, in South Africa, there is no control. And absolutely no control. So what tips can you share, with us, with the listeners? I own a gun, and how do I take care of this now, the situation, that I don't do something stupid to myself or someone else?
Yes, I love that. I love this conversation. So something, and I like to keep it simple, just knowing, again, drawing on the signs, if we know we're at risk, if we're thinking about suicide, if we're having, I say, the ebbs and flows of life, if we're having a hard time, we need to know not to have our firearm around us. We need to know to have our firearms locked up and secured, potentially even having a friend hold them for us. And I'll share a story. My husband, who is a veteran, he has a concealed carry license to carry a firearm on his hip all the time, on him. So when he's out in public, he has this firearm. But he's also a veteran who, has his own mental health issues. And so there was a couple years ago where he was the ebbs and flows in life, and he was having a hard summer. And I recognized that he was struggling, recognized those signs. And I had the conversation with him about his risks. I asked him about thoughts of suicide. And then I moved into the conversation of, where's your firearm? And he said, I've been leaving it at home. And that was fantastic. In my head, I was jumping for joy. Of course, in the conversation with him, we're addressing, his thoughts of suicide and talking about the care on all that. But in my head, I'm like jumping for joy that he made this decision all on his own by recognizing he was struggling, and he empowered himself to be safe with that firearm, knowing that it was a risk, knowing that at any moment in his risk time, he could grab that firearm and make a decision he can't take back. So he knew, I'm going to leave my firearm at home, secured in a lockbox. When it's not on his hip, it's in a lockbox, secured. It's actually a biometric safe. So it's still quick access, still available for safety, but it's in his, I don't want to say exactly where it is because he always gets mad at me. Don't tell people where my gun is. But it's in a locked, secure box where all he has to do when he's ready to have it, put his thumbprint on it, and he takes it, and then he has it back on him. So during this time of, despair, if you will, that he was having his moment of mental health issues, depression, and he kept his firearm secured at home, and he knew it was there. So what we say is we want to create time and space, time and distance between that most lethal means. But then when he, dealt with what he was going through, he picked his firearm back up and went on with his life. And he could because he was alive. Right. And so that's the tip I'll say. I have my own war, if you will, against the on top of the refrigerator handgun. The nightstand handgun, we don't want those. If they're going to be on top of the refrigerator, it still needs to have a cable lock on it, because we can, if we are thinking of suicide and we go to grab our firearm, at least it's locked up. And then I have to look for the key, and then I have to unlock it. So all those periods of time can help reframe our brain to potentially say, what am I doing? What am I doing? I need to call the crisis line because I'm struggling. So like not making it so easily accessible. That's is securing it, creating that time and space between our firearm. And also when there's kids in the home, you know.
I was just thinking of that. Yes.
Yes. We don't want this what we say is we don't want any unauthorized access to a firearm. So they need to be secured, have a cable lock, be in a gun safe, not just be readily out, so that any unauthorized access, whether it's from kids, whether it's from someone breaking in and stealing the firearm, or whether it's from ourselves when we're not ourselves, when we're struggling, we need to make sure our firearms are secured and out of reach.
And I'm thinking of, and I'm sure you know as well, Ashley, that there have been horrific tragedies where youth have died by suicide using their parents' gun. And not to assume that the youth doesn't know the code to get into the box if it is locked up too.
Or we change it. Yes,
change it. Yes.
I have a colleague who, shout out Donna Marie Drucker. She's one of my favorite suicide prevention colleagues. She shares a story of, she has an attempt when she was younger. Her father was a gunsmith. She was very comfortable with firearms. There were lots of firearms in the home. But when she went to have her hardest moment of her attempt, the guns were locked up. And she shares, if the guns wouldn't have been locked up, she would not be alive today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But do you ever feel like, I don't know, I'm just thinking, I'm talking out loud here. Like, is there any triggers, that a spouse at home listening to the show should watch out for? Because maybe things can seem okay, a good couple of years have passed by, and then something triggers, and next thing you know, we have gun violence on the table,
Yes.
Ashley, could you also add in something about alcohol and substance use into the conversation too?
Yes. Yeah. So VA, our approach to recognizing when someone is in crisis is what we call VA SAVE. It's an acronym that we have. We have a whole training on it. I'd love to give this training, but it's about an hour-long training. But the first part is the S is signs, recognizing signs when someone is struggling. And we talk about changes in people. If someone is abnormally angry, if someone is abnormally overusing substances like alcohol and drugs, and exhibiting risky behavior, if someone is facing sleeplessness, hopelessness, that talking about suicide, that's where and if we recognize the signs, then we want to move on to A, which is asking the question, having the conversation, because someone may not be thinking about suicide. They could just be struggling, right? Having those signs. But the most important part is if you see someone for where they are at, where they're struggling, recognizing that, those triggers, like you said, that you just see that something's off about my friend, my partner, something's off about them. I just want to ask specifically about suicide, because if they say no, great. But if they say yes, it opens the door. You've opened that door. You've invited that conversation in, that now they feel safe. They feel seen, that you've seen them. And so you want to invite that opportunity that if they are thinking about suicide, and if they are feeling shame about it, if they are feeling scared about it, that they don't know, they may not know how to talk about it. But if you open that door for them to say, hey, I've been seeing that you're struggling. I've been recognizing, all this is going on, and I'm concerned. Have you been having thoughts of suicide? Do you want to kill yourself? Asking in this direct way, so that they say, oh, wow, this person sees me, potentially that's what they're thinking. And then you can talk to them about it and you can validate their experience. That's our V. And then the E is expediting into care and encouraging them that there is help available. Let's call the crisis line right now together. Let's call and get help. So that's the VA's approach, that SAVE. Signs, asking the question, validating the experience, and then expediting and encouraging into care.
You know what's common in South Africa is, I don't know, maybe in the US as well. So someone may be going through some form of mental illness, the gun gets involved, they shoot their partner, they turn the gun on themselves. Some people can label it an act of love. I don't want to leave her alone. I don't want to leave him alone. Some cases, the children are also killed, and then the gun is turned on himself.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's really sad. And there's no control over it. As I said, there's no gun control. So how can there be control?
Wow. That's heavy. Yeah. And we see that in the US too. And, we have to believe that all suicide is preventable, but there are those times, the murder suicides, the suicide by there are people that are, set on taking their lives. And I have to hope that is preventable, but the statistics show clearly that people are still taking their lives in horrific ways, just like you mentioned. Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
We have an ambitious goal, but we got faith.
Ashley, what more needs to be done? So the more of what we're already doing, and are there new approaches that we should be trying? I know for both of us in Oregon that the most recent for the state suicide statistic is that it's the 8th leading cause of death, whereas it had been previously, and I hope I'm correct, I think it was like the 10th leading cause of death, but most recently it's the 8th leading cause of death.
It's definitely going up. And I'd say keep on doing what we're doing, having these conversations, because what we know from data is areas that implement these public health evidence-based strategies, the rates are lower. States that have, and this is not a ploy for gun control, but states that have healthy conversations about firearm ownership, because California and New York have statistically low suicide rates, but they have very high gun control. But then Texas throws a wrench in that because Texas has basically no gun control, right? Because they're Texas. I lived in Texas for 8 years and I loved it. And everyone has a gun in Texas. But what Texas does really well is talk about gun safety. They train their law enforcement officers really well in encountering individuals with firearms. They talk about de-escalation. They talk about mental health. They talk about that really well. And so their rate is lower too. So I would say the current thing is really a focus on firearm safety, safe storage of firearms, safe conversations about firearms while respecting firearm ownership. So that's a key piece there. Definitely not talking about gun control, respecting a person's right to own a firearm, but how to be safe with that firearm, knowing that it does increase your risk of suicide. And so kind of that conversation. And then also just continuing to implement building connection in our communities, encouraging safety plans. So encouraging a lot. That's one of my goals this next year, is to work with communities to build awareness around creating a safety plan, much like, when you go to fairs and the fire department's there and they talk about have a plan for if there's a fire in your house, where are you going to escape to? Where's the meeting place outside of your front yard so that everyone knows where to go? Having this plan. So there's encouragement to have a safety plan where if you are having thoughts of suicide, you have this written plan. The VA actually has a safety plan app where you can fill out who are you going to call when you're at risk, including the crisis line, but who are your confidants that you can, rely on? What are your plans for your firearms? What are your tools to help keep you grounded? what are your medical providers, all these things so that you can prepare if you find yourself in a crisis, or if you find a friend or a family member in crisis. What can you do?
I'm thinking back on what you shared about the training that you were afforded in the military, that the mission, a primary mission, is my safety plan.
I love that. Yes.
And maybe that the power behind the word mission, right? The driving force. What is my mission? My mission is to keep myself safe, right? For
I love that.
myself and for others.
I love that, Diana. It's my mission to stay safe. Yes. Because if we aren't here for ourselves or other people, then yeah, that can be a struggle.
Yeah, if you're ever interested possibly in doing something creative together, as we're talking, I was getting like thoughts in my head about, my mission is to keep myself safe. And you'd have someone in the military who's looking in the mirror, and the mirror image is also speaking to the person, right? And in a sense of it being self-reflection, right?
Yes.
And there's a conversation going on between the two of them, right? And then it's going into suicide prevention.
Well, that's why I love the Hold On campaign. I mean, hold on. That's that time and distance, because what we know of the most critical crisis points, it's fleeting. It's a very brief moment.
Yes.
So if we can just hold on and focus on the mission, focus on staying alive, focus on being alive, focus on being here tomorrow,
Yes.
that today's not the day that I'm going to take my life, that I want to be here tomorrow. If we can just hold on. I know I love all these positive ways to honor our life.
I wanted to swing back a moment to what you were saying about symptoms that a person may be evidencing. Another, and this can be paradoxical per se, but let's say someone has been just quote, not themselves. So lack of energy, loss of interest, they're isolating. And then you notice that they're doing so much better, which could be very positive. They are doing better, right? However, there can be instances where a person has made the decision that that their plan is to kill themselves, and their mood has lifted related to that plan. So in a compassionate, caring way, a person could explore that with someone. Hey, you're feeling so much better. That's great. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Tell me about it. Not in an inquisitive, negative way, but just a caring way, because that can happen. And then it becomes a shock. They seemed like they were so happy. They were, they had all their energy back, and all of a sudden they're dead. Another is to not lose the connection with someone, right? So another example is a person who's been psychiatrically admitted for their mental health and suicidality. They're actually at increased risk of suicide within the first couple of weeks of discharge from the hospital.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned before about having a safety net, right? And the reality that people are the safety net, and connections, active connecting is the safety net.
And it can be heavy. I find myself encountering this in my own mental health journey of therapy is hard. Once we identify that we're struggling, then we have to still go through it. We have to name and honor everything that's making us feel this way, that's playing a part in these thoughts that we're having, this, despair that we're feeling. And it's hard. It can be a struggle, and I think when people ask about it, when people see you and you have that safety net, it can be such a huge help because it's going to be a journey to ride out what's going on.
I really love your use of the word honor, because if we can honor our own pain,
Yes.
right, and honor
Yes.
others, then there's that sense of dignity, that I honor
Dignity.
it, I understand it, I appreciate it, there's reasons for it. And the answer does not mean that I should exit this mortal coil, right? But in honoring it can also give us the compassionate energy and strength, right? Or that inner will that in honoring it, I'm going to continue, because something is going to change in terms of a positive growth, that this moment is not forever, right? That something can come of this. And what I need to keep that alive in me, because that's real. But the honoring, I think, is important. And I don't know if that's talked about enough.
Well, thank you. Because I do want to honor it, because I am a big fan of no bad parts, right? And even thoughts of suicide are still a part of me when and if I'm having them. And it's still me. And I want to respect me. And it can be a part that I can work on. And I love my boss. I love her. And she has such words of wisdom. And she says, feeling is healing. And if we're not feeling even the scary parts, then we can't lead to healing.
I've read some places where the idea of honoring it, or I'll put it a different way, that in the despair is also what we value in life. Right? So if we feel the loss of that, or the despair of a traumatic event, then at the same moment, that's also a window into what's important to us, what we value, what makes life worth living. And with the sense of, so that's what I need to bring into my life. Right? Right. And that without the devastating feeling of, oh, that can never happen. Like, I value this, but that's never going to happen.
Right.
Sort of opposite, which is, oh, I'm feeling so terrible because it's important for me to have loving relationships in my life. Or I'm feeling so terrible because, wow, maybe I need to go to the doctor. Maybe I have hypothyroidism, and that's why I'm feeling depressed, right? That it can trigger an opening into, well, that's what's important to me, and I can still act on that. Not that it's all over, but this is giving me a warning sign, or shining a light onto what I need to do next.
Yes. And it's such a part of the whole person. Yes. Like, not shaming that part, but bringing it into part of the whole person of what's going on. Yeah.
Well, Ashley, thank you so very much. And do you have any last words that you'd like to share with our listening audience?
I'll just say that suicide is everyone's business, and we can all play a role in preventing it and helping to save lives.
Including our own, right?
Including our own, exactly.
Yes. And what is the website for those that live locally in Oregon for the VA? And how could they find out? Would it be the 988 number, and any other resources you want to share?
Yes, there's veteranscrisisline.net for information about 988 and pressing 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line. And then there's also, you could just do a search for VA suicide prevention in Portland, Oregon, and our team will come up. We do have a team line on there, but also there's a VA resource locator where a person can access any of the VA suicide prevention teams and find the person that does my role at any of the VAs across the country.
And when you mention lockboxes, you can obtain them for free, can't you? Isn't there a way to do it for free?
So The VA, we do hand out cable locks for free for anyone. I can even order those for organizations who want to do a safe storage campaign. But veterans they do have to go through, if they are enrolled in VA healthcare, they do have to go through an assessment. And if they qualify and for being enough at risk, then they can get ordered a lockbox. From the VA, but I will say also a lot of community organizations,
Yes.
a lot of county health departments, sometimes even sheriff's offices will do campaigns to hand out lock boxes. So I would say contact their local, a lot of counties, every county in Oregon has a suicide prevention team within their county. So to contact them and we'll find you one.
Excellent. Thank you again, Ashley.
Thank you. It's so
Bye.
nice to meet
Thanks,
you.
Ashley.
Thank you,
Bye.
Diane.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.